The telegram crumpled in Penelope Abbott's gloved hand as she watched the stagecoach disappear into a cloud of dust, carrying away the man who was supposed to become her husband, along with every cent she had brought for their new life together. She sat on the wooden bench outside the Buffalo, Wyoming station in May of 1878, her carefully packed trunk beside her, her wedding dress folded neatly inside tissue paper that now felt like a cruel joke. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small station platform, and Penelope felt each ray like an accusation. 22 years old, alone in a town where she knew no one, with exactly 17 cents remaining in her reticule and nowhere to go. The other passengers had long since collected their belongings and disappeared into the dusty streets of Buffalo, leaving her isolated in her humiliation. Thomas had seemed so genuine in his letters. For 8 months, they had corresponded after his cousin in Philadelphia had introduced them through the mail. He had written about his mercantile shop, his modest but comfortable home, his dreams of building a family with a good woman who valued honesty and hard work. Penelope had believed every word, had seen in those letters a chance at the kind of partnership her parents had shared before fever took them both 3 years ago. She had sold nearly everything she owned to afford the train tickets and stagecoach fare from Pennsylvania, had brought her mother's silver and her father's watch as her contribution to their household, had traveled for 2 weeks with hope blazing in her chest like a lantern. The reality had been swift and brutal. Thomas had met her at the station, all right, but his smile had faltered the moment he saw her step down from the coach. His eyes had traveled over her auburn hair, her simple but well-made traveling dress, her face that she knew was pleasant enough but not beautiful, and something in his expression had shuddered closed. "You are taller than I expected," he had said, and those 6 words had contained a universe of disappointment. It had taken him less than an hour. He had walked her to the station office, claimed he needed to check on something, and then returned with her trunk and a carefully neutral expression. He had matters to attend to, he said. Business that could not wait. Perhaps she should rest here while he sorted things out. She had waited, understanding growing like ice in her stomach until she saw him loading his wagon. When she approached, he would not meet her eyes. "I am sorry, Miss Abbott," he had said, his voice tight with something that might have been shame but looked more like irritation. "I have reconsidered. The arrangement will not suit after all. I have taken the liberty of retrieving your belongings. I wish you well." He had driven away before she could form words, before shock could transform into anger or grief or anything useful at all. Only later, when she checked her trunk with shaking hands, did she discover that her mother's silver and father's watch were gone. Stolen by a man who had decided she was not worth marrying but was worth robbing. Now the sun was beginning its descent toward the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that would have been beautiful if Penelope could feel anything beyond numb desperation. She had no money for a room at the boarding house. The station master had already eyed her with suspicion, clearly wondering if she planned to spend the night on his platform. She had no funds to book passage back east, even if she had anywhere to return to. The boarding house where she had lived in Philadelphia had already rented her room to someone else. The sound of boots on wooden planks made her look up, though she quickly dropped her gaze again. A man was approaching, his shadow falling long across the platform in the declining light. Penelope kept her eyes fixed on her folded hands, willing him to pass by, to leave her to her misery and her impossible situation. The footsteps stopped directly in front of her. Penelope could see worn leather boots, dusty denim, the frayed hem of a dark canvas duster. She waited for whatever was coming, some comment or proposition or mockery. This was how women fell, she knew. This was how desperation turned into choices that could never be unmade. Instead, she heard a rustle of fabric, the creak of joints, and when she dared glance up, the man was kneeling before her on one knee, his hat in his hands, his face level with hers. He had dark hair that needed cutting, eyes the color of strong coffee, and a face that was all angles and sun-weathered skin. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against his tanned complexion. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with the lean build of someone who worked hard for a living. His eyes held something she had not expected, genuine concern without calculation. "Miss," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble with a slight Texas drawl softening the edges of his words. "My name is Nathan Frost. I hope you will pardon my forwardness, but I have been watching the station for the better part of 2 hours now, and I have seen that you have been sitting here alone all that time. The sun is going down. This is not a safe place for a lady after dark. I do not know your circumstances, and you have no cause to trust a stranger, but I am asking you to consider what I am about to say." Penelope found herself unable to look away from his face. There was something direct and honest in his gaze, something that reminded her of her father, who had always looked people square in the eye when he spoke. Nathan took a breath and continued, "I own a ranch about 8 miles north of town. It is not much, just a small cattle operation, but it is respectable and it is mine. I have been looking for someone to help with the household matters, cooking and such, since my mother passed last winter, and I am about as useful in a kitchen as a 3-legged chair. I can offer fair wages, separate accommodations in the foreman's cabin that is empty since my hired man moved on, and references from anyone in town you care to ask about my character. I know how this must sound, a stranger approaching you like this, but I am asking you straight. Will you trust me?" The words hung in the air between them. Penelope's mind raced through possibilities, through dangers and risks, and the crushing awareness that she had almost no options. Yet something in the way this man knelt before her, hat literally in hand, offering rather than demanding, asking rather than assuming, made her pause. "Why?" she heard herself ask, her voice rougher than she intended. "Why would you offer help to a complete stranger?" Nathan's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes, some old pain that he carried carefully. "Because 6 years ago, my sister found herself in a difficult situation in Amarillo. She was 17, traveling to meet our aunt, and someone stole everything she had. She spent 3 days on the street before a kind woman gave her work and a safe place to stay. That woman did not have to help her, but she did. My sister made it home safely because of that kindness. I figure I owe the world a debt for that mercy." It was the detail about his sister being 17 that decided Penelope. That specific age, the clear memory, the way his voice had tightened just slightly when he mentioned those 3 days on the street. This was not a practice story. This was truth. "I was supposed to be married today," Penelope said, surprised by her own willingness to speak. "The gentleman decided I was not suitable. He also decided my belongings were." Nathan's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his temple. "I am sorry that happened to you, miss. A man who would do such a thing is no gentleman. I have 17 cents and nowhere to go," Penelope continued, the words tumbling out now that she had started. "I cannot pay you for room or board. I have nothing to offer as surety except my word that I am a decent cook and a hard worker." "Your word is enough," Nathan said. He stood, extending his hand to her. "I will not press you for details you do not wish to share. I will not expect anything beyond what I have stated. You will have your own space with a lock on the door, and I will not cross your threshold without invitation. You can stay as long as you need to get back on your feet, whether that is a week or a year. If you find the arrangement unsuitable for any reason, I will personally ensure you have safe passage anywhere you wish to go. Those are my terms. What do you say?" Penelope looked at his outstretched hand. She had been raised to be cautious, to guard her reputation, to understand that accepting help from a strange man could compromise her completely. But she had also been raised to recognize character when she saw it, and something in Nathan Frost's steady gaze and straightforward manner spoke to an integrity that Thomas, with all his flowery letters, had lacked entirely. She placed her hand in his and felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip as he helped her to her feet. "I accept your offer, Mr. Frost, and thank you." "Nathan, please," he said, releasing her hand and reaching for her trunk. He lifted it as though it weighed nothing, settling it on his shoulder. "My wagon is just down the street. We should head out before full dark if you are amenable. The road is safe enough, but easier to travel with light." Penelope followed him down the platform steps, her legs stiff from sitting for so many hours. The main street of Buffalo was busy with evening activity, men heading to saloons, shop owners closing up for the night, a few women hurrying home with baskets on their arms. Several people nodded to Nathan as they passed, and Penelope noticed the respectful way they greeted him. Whatever else he might be, Nathan Frost was known and accepted in this town. His wagon was a sturdy affair, the bed clean and well-maintained, pulled by two healthy-looking horses that whickered softly as he approached. He loaded her trunk with care, then helped her up onto the bench seat before climbing up beside her. The horses needed only a gentle word to start moving, heading north out of town at a steady pace. They rode in silence for a while, and Penelope was grateful for it. The enormity of the day was beginning to settle over her like a heavy blanket, the shock giving way to exhaustion. She watched the landscape roll by in the fading light, the vast openness of Wyoming so different from the crowded streets of Philadelphia. The mountains stood dark and massive against the horizon, and the grass rippled in the evening breeze like an ocean. "Tell me about the ranch," Penelope said finally, needing something to anchor her thoughts. Nathan kept his eyes on the road, but she could see the slight relaxation in his shoulders, as though he had been waiting for her to speak. "It is called the Frost Ranch, original as anything," he said, and there was a hint of humor in his voice. 200 acres of decent grazing land, a small herd of about 50 head of cattle right now, though I am building it up slowly. Got a good water source, a creek that runs year-round. The house is nothing fancy, but it is solid. My father built it 20 years ago when he first claimed the land. I have a few horses, chickens, a milk cow. It is enough for one man to manage with occasional help during branding and roundup." "And your family?" Penelope asked, then immediately worried she had overstepped. "I apologize, that is too personal." "No, it is fine," Nathan said. "You should know who you are working for. My father died 5 years ago, caught a bullet breaking up a fight in town that had nothing to do with him. My mother held on for a few years, but the heart went out of her after he passed. She died peaceful in her sleep last December. My sister, Sarah, she lives in Cheyenne now with her husband. They have a baby girl born just last month. I have no other living family that I know of." "I am sorry for your losses," Penelope said quietly. She understood that particular grief all too well. Nathan nodded his acknowledgement. "And you? Do you have family back east?" "I did. My parents passed 3 years ago within a week of each other, both from fever. I had no siblings. There was a distant aunt in Pittsburgh, but we were never close, and she made it clear she had no interest in taking me in after my parents died." I supported myself with work at a millinery shop and lived in a boarding house. When Thomas, the man I came here to marry, began writing to me, it seemed like a chance at something better than just surviving. She paused, the bitterness rising despite her efforts to keep it down. I was mistaken. He is a fool, Nathan said bluntly. Begging your pardon for speaking plainly, but any man who would turn away a woman willing to travel 2,000 miles on faith alone is a fool who does not deserve what he was offered. The fierce sincerity in his words surprised Penelope, sending an unexpected warmth through her chest. That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness, it is fact, Nathan replied. I do not hold with people who make promises and break them. A person's word should mean something. They fell back into silence, but it felt more comfortable now, less loaded with uncertainty. The wagon rattled along the dirt road, and stars began to appear overhead as the last light faded from the sky. Penelope found herself relaxing incrementally, the tension that had gripped her shoulders all day beginning to loosen. After what felt like an hour, Nathan pointed ahead. There. That is home. Penelope peered through the darkness and could just make out the shape of buildings against the starlit sky. As they drew closer, the details emerged. A solid-looking ranch house with a covered porch, a barn, several smaller outbuildings and corrals. A lamp glowed in one window of the house, and as they pulled into the yard, a dog barked once and came bounding up to the wagon, tail wagging furiously. That is just Bear, Nathan said, climbing down. He sounds fierce, but he has never met a person he did not want to be friends with. He reached up to help Penelope down, and the dog immediately pressed against her skirts, sniffing enthusiastically. She reached down tentatively to pat his head, and he practically vibrated with joy. He likes you, Nathan observed. That is a good sign. Bear is an excellent judge of character. Nathan retrieved her trunk and led her across the yard to a small cabin set back from the main house. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, and Penelope heard the strike of a match before warm light filled the space as he lit a lamp. The cabin was simple but clean. One main room with a bed, a table and chairs, a small stove, and a dresser. A door opened to a tiny second room that held a washstand and mirror. The bed was neatly made and the floor had been recently swept. It is not much, Nathan said, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed. But it is private and secure. The lock is good, see? He demonstrated the heavy bolt on the inside of the door. I will not disturb you tonight. You must be exhausted. In the morning, come up to the house when you are ready and we can discuss the work arrangements properly. I will leave you to rest now. He was at the door before Penelope found her voice. Nathan, he turned, eyebrows raised. Thank you, she said, and the words felt inadequate for the enormity of what he had done. Truly. His expression softened. You are welcome, Penelope. Rest well. After he left, Penelope sat on the edge of the bed and simply breathed. The cabin was warm despite the cool evening, and through the small window she could see the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She should have been terrified, alone in a stranger's cabin in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming. Instead, for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, she felt something that might have been hope. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of a rooster crowing. For a moment, disoriented, Penelope could not remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, looking around the cabin. Everything was as it had been when she fell asleep, still wearing her traveling dress, too exhausted to even change. Someone had left a pitcher of fresh water on the table while she slept, along with a clean towel and a covered plate. Penelope got up and lifted the cloth to find biscuits and butter. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had barely eaten the day before. She made quick work of washing her face and hands, changed into a fresh dress, and ate the biscuits slowly, savoring each bite. When she finally emerged from the cabin, the sun was well up, and the ranch was alive with activity. She could hear chickens clucking somewhere behind the barn, and in the corral, Nathan was working with a young horse on a lead line. He was hatless in the morning sun, his shirt sleeves rolled up, moving with the kind of easy confidence that came from years of practice. He saw her and raised a hand in greeting, said something to the horse, and handed the lead line to a younger man she had not noticed before. He walked over to meet her halfway across the yard, Bear trotting along beside him. "Good morning," Nathan said. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Penelope admitted. "Thank you for the breakfast." "That was actually Jesse, my hired hand." Nathan gestured toward the young man in the corral. "He comes in a few times a week to help with the heavy work. He is the one who has been making my meals lately, with results I would describe charitably as barely edible. He will be grateful to have someone who actually knows their way around a kitchen." Penelope smiled despite herself. "I see. So I have been rescued from destitution to save you from bad cooking." "That is one way to look at it," Nathan said, and there was a glimmer of humor in his eyes. "Come on, I will show you the house." The ranch house was larger than it had appeared in the dark, built from solid logs with a stone foundation. Inside, it was clean but obviously lacking a woman's touch. The furniture was well made but sparse, the curtains were plain, and there were no decorative touches whatsoever. The kitchen was spacious and well equipped, clearly built by someone who understood the importance of a good workspace, even if they did not personally use it much. "My mother loved to cook," Nathan explained, seeing Penelope's appreciation for the large stove and ample counter space. "She made sure this kitchen had everything she needed. I have been trying to keep things clean, but I will admit housekeeping is not my strongest skill. If you can manage the cooking and general tidying, that would be more than enough to earn your keep. I am offering $30 a month in wages plus room and board. Does that seem fair?" $30 was generous, more than fair for the work described. Penelope nodded. "That is very generous, Nathan. I accept." "Good." He looked relieved. "I should tell you, I am usually up before dawn and often do not come back to the house until evening. If you could have breakfast ready early and supper ready when I come in, that would be ideal. Lunch I usually take cold while working. Beyond that, your time is your own to manage as you see fit." They discussed the practical details, where things were kept, what supplies needed replenishing, Nathan's preferences for meals which were refreshingly simple. He liked plain food, cooked well with plenty of it. No fussiness, no complicated recipes. Penelope felt her confidence growing. This she could do. This was work she knew and understood. She spent that first day familiarizing herself with the kitchen, taking stock of supplies and preparing a proper supper. Nathan had bacon and beans, flour and cornmeal, potatoes and onions, a few jars of preserves his mother had put up before she died. Penelope found dried beef and made a stew, rich and savory, with biscuits and apple preserves. When Nathan came in that evening, dusty and tired, the look on his face when he smelled the food made all her efforts worthwhile. "This smells like home," he said quietly, and Penelope understood that he was not just talking about the food. They ate at the kitchen table, conversation coming easier now. Nathan told her about the ranch work, the plans he had for expanding the herd, the challenges of managing land in Wyoming's unpredictable climate. Penelope found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about cattle and horses, about how the ranch operated. Nathan seemed pleased by her curiosity, answering thoughtfully, treating her questions with respect rather than condescension. The days fell into a rhythm. Penelope woke early, prepared breakfast, and sent Nathan off with a full stomach and a packed lunch. She spent her days cleaning, cooking, mending clothes, tending the kitchen garden she discovered behind the house. Nathan had tried to maintain it, but weeds had taken over and needed serious attention. Penelope found herself enjoying the work, the physical labor and tangible results soothing something restless in her soul. In the evenings, Nathan would return. They would share supper, and gradually they began to talk about more than just the day's work. Nathan told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the hard winter of 1871 when they nearly lost everything. Penelope found herself sharing memories of Philadelphia, of her parents, of the small joys and sorrows that made up a life. 2 weeks after Penelope's arrival, Nathan came back to the house at midday, which was unusual. She was in the kitchen garden, pulling weeds, her hair tied back with a scarf and dirt under her fingernails. He dismounted his horse and walked over, his expression serious. "I need to ride into Buffalo tomorrow," he said. "There is a man there I think you should speak with. Marshal Davies. He should know about Thomas Mitchell and the theft of your belongings." Penelope stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. She had been trying not to think about Thomas, about the humiliation and loss. "I have no proof. It would be my word against his. You have your train tickets showing when you arrived, and half the station saw you sitting there alone," Nathan said. "Beyond that, Thomas Mitchell has a reputation in town that is not as clean as he would like people to believe. There have been complaints before about his business practices. The marshal should at least be made aware of what happened. If nothing else, it might prevent him from doing the same to someone else." The thought of confronting Thomas, even through official channels, made Penelope's stomach clench. But Nathan was right. She nodded slowly. "All right. I will go with you tomorrow." The ride to Buffalo the next morning was quiet, both of them absorbed in their own thoughts. When they reached town, Nathan tied the horses outside a building marked with a marshal's star and escorted Penelope inside. Marshal Davies was a man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened to Penelope's story without interruption, making notes in a leather-bound book. "I will speak with Mitchell," the marshal said when she finished. "Cannot promise anything, miss. Without witnesses to the actual theft, it is difficult to prove. But there has been talk about Mitchell for a while now. If I find evidence that supports your claim, I will pursue it. At the very least, I can make it known that his conduct is under scrutiny." It was not much, but it was more than Penelope had expected. As they left the marshal's office, Nathan touched her elbow gently. "There is one more thing. Come with me." He led her down the street to the land office. Inside, he spoke briefly with the clerk, who pulled out a large ledger and ran his finger down a page. Nathan nodded, thanked him, and guided Penelope back outside. "What was that about?" she asked. "Just checking on something," Nathan said. "Thomas Mitchell does not actually own that mercantile. He has been managing it for the real owner, a man named Carson who lives back east. I wanted to confirm that before we left. It means Mitchell's position here is not as secure as he pretends. If Carson hears about complaints against his manager, he might take action." Penelope looked at Nathan with new appreciation. "You did not have to do all this." "Yes, I did," Nathan said simply. "You deserved better than what he did to you. I cannot fix it, but I can make sure the right people know about it." They had lunch at a small restaurant before heading back to the ranch. As they ate, Penelope noticed the way people in town looked at them, the speculative glances, the whispers. She knew what they were thinking, what assumptions they were making about a woman living at Nathan's ranch. She waited for Nathan to address it, to suggest some arrangement to protect his reputation, but he said nothing. He seemed genuinely unconcerned with what people thought. That night, after supper, Penelope found herself lingering at the table instead of immediately returning to her cabin. The evening was warm and the kitchen door stood open, letting in the sounds of crickets and the cool breeze that came down from the mountains. "Nathan," she said carefully, "people in town today, they were looking at us. At me. I do not want my presence here to damage your reputation." Nathan had been rolling a cigarette, but he paused and looked at her directly. "Penelope, I will be straight with you. Yes, some people will talk. They always do. But anyone who knows me knows I am not the kind of man to take advantage of someone in a difficult position. The people whose opinions I value understand that. The rest can think what they like." "Still," Penelope persisted, "if it becomes a problem, I do not want you to suffer for helping me." "It will not become a problem," Nathan said firmly. "And even if it did, that would be my concern, not yours. You have done nothing wrong. You are working for fair wages in fair conditions. Do not let the small-mindedness of others make you feel ashamed of that." His conviction was absolute, and Penelope felt something shift inside her, a loosening of tension she had not fully realized she was carrying. "Thank you," she said quietly. Nathan lit his cigarette and took a long draw before speaking again. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you came out here to marry Thomas Mitchell, what were you hoping for? Not the practical things, I mean. What were you really hoping to find?" Penelope considered the question, watching smoke curl toward the ceiling. "A home," she said finally. "Not just a place to live, but a real home. A partnership with someone who would value what I brought to it. Someone to build a life with, to face the hard times with, to share the good times with." "I know that sounds naive." "It does not sound naive," Nathan said. "It sounds like what most people want and too few people find." He was quiet for a moment, then continued, "My parents had that. I saw what a good marriage looked like, what it meant when two people were true partners. That is why I never married. I would rather be alone than settle for less than what they had." "What was their secret?" Penelope asked, genuinely curious. Nathan smiled, a rare and genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "They talked to each other, about everything. The ranch, their worries, their hopes. They made decisions together. My father never considered himself above my mother, and she never considered herself beneath him. They were equals in every way that mattered, and they laughed together. Even in the hard times, they could find something to laugh about." "They sound wonderful," Penelope said, feeling a pang of longing for what she had lost with her own parents and what she had thought to find with Thomas. "They were," Nathan agreed. "I miss them every day." The conversation drifted to other topics, easier ones, and by the time Penelope returned to her cabin that night, she realized that she felt more comfortable with Nathan Frost than she had with Thomas Mitchell after months of correspondence. There was an ease between them that surprised her, a natural companionship that required no forcing. The weeks turned into months. Spring gave way to summer, and the ranch blossomed under Penelope's care. The garden produced abundantly, and she spent long afternoons preserving vegetables and fruits for the coming winter, working in the kitchen with the windows open and Bear sleeping in the shade of the porch. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the demands of the seasons, the satisfaction of hard work completed well. Nathan began teaching her to ride, starting with the gentlest horse in his small string. Penelope had never been on a horse before coming west, and her first attempts were clumsy and terrifying. But Nathan was patient, encouraging without being patronizing, and gradually she gained confidence. There was something liberating about sitting astride a horse, feeling the power of the animal beneath her, seeing the landscape from this new vantage point. One evening in late July, They rode out together to check on the cattle in the far pasture. The sun was setting, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson. Penelope sat her horse with increasing ease, and Nathan rode beside her, pointing out landmarks, telling her the names of distant peaks. "I love this land," he said, his voice carrying a depth of feeling she had rarely heard from him. "Some people find it too empty, too harsh. But to me, it is perfect. There is room to breathe here, room to become who you are meant to be without the world pressing in on all sides." "I am beginning to understand that," Penelope said. "When I first arrived, I found it frightening, all this space. But now I find it beautiful. The way the grass moves in the wind, the size of the sky, the mountains, it feels like you can see forever." Nathan looked at her, something in his expression she could not quite read. "You have changed since you came here. You seem more yourself, if that makes sense." It did make sense. Penelope had felt it too, a gradual shedding of the constraints she had lived under in Philadelphia, the constant awareness of what was proper, what was expected, what was allowed. Here, she could work in the garden until sunset without worrying about what the neighbors thought. She could ride astride instead of side saddle. She could speak her mind without filtering every word through the lens of feminine propriety. She was still herself, but more so, somehow larger than she had been. "I feel more myself," she admitted. "This place, this life, it suits me in ways I did not expect." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence as stars began to emerge overhead. When they reached the yard, Nathan helped her dismount, his hands strong and steady on her waist. For a moment they stood close, and Penelope felt a sudden awareness of him, of the breadth of his shoulders, the way the fading light caught in his dark eyes, the warmth of his hands even through the fabric of her riding skirt. Nathan stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. "I will see to the horses. You go on inside." Penelope nodded and walked to the house, her heart beating faster than the easy ride warranted. She made supper in a distracted haze, her thoughts circling around that moment in the yard, trying to understand what it meant. The truth was unavoidable, though she had been trying not to acknowledge it for weeks now. She was falling in love with Nathan Frost, or perhaps she had already fallen and was only now admitting it to herself. She loved the way he moved through the world with quiet competence, never boasting but always capable. She loved his dry sense of humor, the rare smiles that felt like gifts when he bestowed them. She loved his fundamental decency, the way he treated everyone with respect regardless of their station. She loved the life he had built here, the simple beauty of it, the honesty of it. But loving him was complicated by the circumstances of her presence here. She was his employee, living on his property, dependent on his goodwill for her very survival. The power imbalance was undeniable, and Penelope knew that any advance from her could be seen as opportunistic, a grasping attempt to secure her position. Worse, any advance from him could be seen as taking advantage of her vulnerable position. The situation was impossible, no matter how she examined it. She resolved to say nothing, to keep her feelings private and focus on the work she had been hired to do. Nathan had given her shelter and employment when she had nothing. The least she could do was not complicate his life with unwanted romantic attention, but keeping that resolution proved harder than she anticipated. August arrived with blazing heat, and the work of the ranch intensified. Nathan hired additional hands for a few weeks to help with branding and moving cattle to higher pasture. Penelope found herself cooking for a crew of 5 men, rising even earlier to prepare vast quantities of food, packing lunches, making dinners that could feed hungry cowboys. Nathan was different around the other men, more reserved, his face settling into harder lines. She realized this was his working self, the man who had to command respect and maintain authority. But in the evenings, after the hired hands had ridden back to their own places, Nathan would relax incrementally, and the man she knew would emerge again. One night, after a particularly long day, Nathan came in late to find Penelope still in the kitchen, finishing the last of the dishes. The other men had eaten and gone, but she had kept Nathan's meal warm. He sat at the table with visible relief, exhaustion written in every line of his body. "You do too much," he said as she set the plate before him. "You do not have to wait up for me like this." "I do not mind," Penelope said, and it was true. These quiet evenings alone with Nathan had become the best part of her day. Nathan ate in silence for a while, then looked up at her. "I have been thinking. The extra work these past weeks, it is above and beyond what we agreed to. I want to increase your wages, $40 a month, and that is not negotiable." "Nathan, that is not necessary." "It is necessary," he said firmly. "You have earned it 10 times over. Besides," and here his expression softened slightly, "I need to make sure you are being paid fairly, so that when you eventually decide to leave, you will have the means to go wherever you choose." The words hit Penelope like cold water when she eventually decided to leave. Of course he assumed she would leave. Why would she stay after all? She was working for wages, nothing more. That this had come to feel like home, that she had come to feel like this was where she belonged, that was her own foolishness. "Thank you," she managed to say. "That is very generous." Nathan nodded and returned his attention to his meal, apparently oblivious to the way his words had shaken her. Penelope excused herself soon after, pleading tiredness, and returned to her cabin. She sat on the bed in the darkness and forced herself to confront the truth of her situation. She was in love with a man who saw her as a temporary employee. She had no claim on him, no right to expect anything beyond what they had agreed to. The smart thing would be to save her wages, make plans, and move on before her feelings became any more entrenched. She could go to Cheyenne, find work there, build a new life in a place where her heart was not at risk. But the thought of leaving the ranch, leaving Nathan, felt like tearing away a part of herself. This place had healed something in her, and Nathan had shown her what a good man looked like, how partnership and respect were supposed to function. How could she leave that? She had no answer, and sleep was a long time coming that night. The roundup concluded at the end of August, and life on the ranch returned to its normal rhythms. September brought cooler temperatures and the beginning of autumn colors on the distant mountains. Penelope continued her work, and Nathan continued his, and on the surface, everything was exactly as it had been. But something had shifted between them, an awareness that neither acknowledged but both felt. Nathan found reasons to come back to the house more often during the day. He needed water, or a tool he had left in the barn near the house, or to check on something that could have easily waited. Penelope found reasons to be outside more, working in the garden long past when the weeding was done, hanging laundry that could have dried just as well in the morning. They were circling each other, drawn together by something neither was willing to name. The first snow came in early October, a light dusting that melted by midday but signaled the changing season. Nathan spent several days making sure all the buildings were secure for winter, repairing the chicken coop, checking the barn roof, splitting wood. Penelope helped where she could, her hands growing calloused, her strength increasing. One afternoon, she was carrying an armload of firewood to her cabin when she slipped on a patch of mud. She went down hard, the wood scattering, her knee striking a rock. Pain shot through her leg, sharp and immediate. She had just managed to sit up, assessing the damage, when Nathan appeared seemingly out of nowhere. "Are you hurt?" His voice was sharp with concern as he knelt beside her. "Just my pride," Penelope tried to joke, but when she moved her leg, she could not suppress a gasp. Blood was seeping through her skirt where her knee had torn open. Without a word, Nathan scooped her up in his arms and carried her not to her cabin but to the main house, settling her carefully in a chair in the kitchen. He moved with swift efficiency, gathering clean cloths and water, carefully lifting her skirt just enough to expose the injury. His touch was gentle as he cleaned the wound, his face set in concentration. "It is not too deep," he said finally, "but it will need to be bandaged properly." He worked carefully, wrapping the clean cloth around her knee, his fingers steady and sure. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and looked up at her. "You should rest it for a day or two. No heavy work." They were very close, Nathan still kneeling before her, his hands resting lightly on her leg. Penelope could see the concern in his eyes, the way his jaw was tight with tension. And suddenly, she understood that it was not just concern for an injured employee. The way he was looking at her, the intensity of it, spoke to something deeper. "Nathan," she said softly, and the word held everything she had been trying not to say. He stood abruptly, turning away, his hands clenching at his sides. "I should go. You need to rest." "Nathan, wait." Penelope stood, testing her weight on the injured leg. It hurt, but it held. "Please do not leave, not like this." He stopped but did not turn around. "Penelope, I cannot," he broke off, frustration evident in every line of his body. "Cannot what?" She took a step toward him, her heart pounding. He turned then, and the look on his face stole her breath. "I cannot keep pretending that you are just my employee, that I think of you as just someone working in my house. I cannot keep pretending that I do not count the hours until supper when I can sit across from you and talk about anything and everything. I cannot keep pretending that watching you work in the garden or ride across the pasture or do any of the 1,000 things you do every day does not make me happier than I have been in years." Penelope's breath caught. "Then do not pretend." Nathan shook his head. "You do not understand. You are here because I offered you work when you needed it. You depend on me for your safety, your security. If we were to, he made a frustrated gesture. I will not take advantage of that. I will not be the kind of man who uses his position to pressure you into something you might not truly want." "Nathan Frost," Penelope said, and there was steel in her voice despite the trembling in her hands. "You honestly think I am so weak-willed that I cannot know my own mind? That I cannot make my own choices? No, of course not, but I am not some fragile creature who needs protecting from herself," Penelope continued, taking another step closer. "You have treated me with nothing but respect since the moment we met. You have given me work and wages and independence. You have never once made me feel obligated to you for anything beyond the work I do. So do not insult me now by suggesting I do not know what I want." Nathan stared at her, something like hope beginning to dawn in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I fell in love with you months ago," Penelope said, the words tumbling out now that she had started. "I am saying that every day I spend here, I fall a little more in love with this place, this life with you. I am saying that when you talked about me eventually leaving, it felt like my heart was breaking. I do not want to leave, Nathan. I want to stay. Not as your employee, as your partner, as your wife if you will have me." For a long moment, Nathan simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, in 3 quick strides, he closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands. "I have been in love with you since the night you accepted my help at the station," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been fighting it every single day because I thought I was protecting you. But if you are sure, if this is truly what you want, then yes. God, yes. I want you as my wife, my partner, my everything." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste kisses Penelope had experienced in her limited past. This was fire and promise, tenderness and passion, a claiming and a surrender all at once. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and he pulled her close, and for a perfect moment, nothing existed except the two of them and the love that had grown between them like wildflowers in spring. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, marry you properly, give you the wedding you deserved but did not get." Penelope laughed, joy bubbling up irrepressibly. "I do not need a fancy wedding, I just need you." "You will have both," Nathan said firmly. "I want everyone in Buffalo to know that you are choosing me freely, that this is what you want. I want there to be no question, no whisper that could taint what we have." "All right," Penelope agreed, touched by his insistence. "We will do it properly, but Nathan, I am already sure." "I was sure weeks ago." He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. "We have time now, all the time in the world." They were married 6 weeks later in Buffalo's small church with half the town in attendance. Marshal Davies gave Penelope away, having taken a paternal interest in her welfare after investigating her complaint against Thomas Mitchell. The marshal had not been able to recover her stolen belongings, but he had made Mitchell's life uncomfortable enough that the man had quietly left town. His position at the mercantile terminated after the marshal's report reached the owner in the east. Penelope wore a dress she made herself from fabric Nathan had insisted on buying for her, a soft blue that matched the Wyoming sky. Nathan wore his Sunday best and looked so handsome it made her heart ache. Jesse stood up as Nathan's best man, and the marshal's wife served as Penelope's attendant. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. When Nathan slipped the gold ring on her finger, his voice was steady and sure as he made his vows. When Penelope promised to love and honor him, she meant every word with a depth of conviction that surprised even herself. This was not the marriage she had traveled west to find, but it was infinitely better than anything she could have imagined. The reception was held at the town hall, with food contributed by various families and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Penelope found herself welcomed by the townspeople with genuine warmth, several women making a point of telling her how happy they were to see Nathan settled with such a fine woman. The acceptance she had not dared hope for was offered freely, and she understood that Nathan had been right. By courting her openly, by making their intentions clear and their marriage public, he had ensured that no shadow of scandal could touch them. They rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, Penelope leaning against Nathan's shoulder, his arm around her waist. When they reached the house, he helped her down from the wagon and then, in a gesture that made her laugh with delight, swept her up in his arms and carried her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Frost," he said, kissing her in the doorway. "I was already home," Penelope replied, but she understood what he meant. This was different now. This was theirs together, fully and completely. Their first months of marriage were an education in joy. Nathan moved Penelope's things from the cabin into the main house, into his bedroom that was now their bedroom, and the intimacy of sharing space and life with him was something Penelope cherished. They learned each other's rhythms, their habits and preferences, the small compromises and adjustments that made a household run smoothly. Winter came with heavy snow, and there were days when they were trapped in the house. The world shrunk down to the warmth of the fire and each other's company. Nathan taught Penelope to play chess on the board his father had carved, and she taught him card games her father had favored. They read aloud to each other from the books in Nathan's small library. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. And they loved each other with a passion that never seemed to diminish, that burned steady and hot through the cold months. Nathan was a considerate and attentive lover, and Penelope discovered depths of feeling and sensation she had never known existed. This physical intimacy, this connection, felt like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. Spring returned, and with it the work of the ranch. But now Penelope was not just an employee but a full partner. She learned to manage the business side of the operation, keeping the books and handling correspondence with buyers. She learned to doctor sick cattle and assist with difficult calvings. She became adept at riding and could work alongside Nathan and Jesse when extra hands were needed. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Nathan's careful stewardship and Penelope's good business sense proved to be a formidable combination. They were able to expand the herd, purchase additional land, make improvements to the buildings. The Frost Ranch gained a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. In the summer of 1879, Penelope realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had helped deliver calves and foals, but the idea of bringing her own child into the world was something else entirely. When she told Nathan, he went very still, and then pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have given me everything, Penelope, everything I never dared hope for." The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope was sick frequently in the early months, and Nathan hovered anxiously, trying to help and mostly just getting in the way. She loved him for it, for the way he brought her weak tea and crackers, held her hair back when she was ill, worried openly about her welfare. As she grew larger, Nathan became increasingly protective, not wanting her to overwork, insisting she rest more. Penelope tolerated it because she understood the fear behind it. His mother had survived childbirth twice, but had lost 2 babies in between, something Nathan had confessed to her late one night. He was terrified of losing either her or the baby. "I am strong," Penelope would remind him, "and women have been doing this since the beginning of time. We will be fine." Their son was born in March of 1880, during a late-season snowstorm that kept the doctor from reaching the ranch in time. Penelope labored for 14 hours with only Nathan and the marshal's wife, who had come to stay for the last few weeks, to help her through it. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, but when the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, the pain seemed to vanish like smoke. Nathan cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face without shame or embarrassment. "He is perfect," he kept saying. "You are both perfect." They named him William Nathan after both their fathers. He was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs and his father's dark hair. Penelope had never known love like what she felt for this tiny person, this perfect combination of her and Nathan. Watching Nathan with their son was a revelation. He was gentle and patient, learning to change diapers and soothe crying fits, singing old songs in his rumbling voice to lull William to sleep. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved with intricate patterns, a labor of love that took months. The years flowed by like water. William grew strong and curious, toddling after his father, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly. In 1882, their daughter Clara was born, a calmer baby than William had been, with Penelope's auburn hair and Nathan's serious eyes. The house filled with the sounds of children, with laughter and occasional tears, with the beautiful chaos of family life. The ranch continued to prosper. They built a new barn and a larger bunkhouse for the hired hands they now employed year-round. Penelope started a small dairy operation, selling butter and cheese in town. Nathan served a term on the town council, becoming a respected voice in the community. In 1885, when William was 5 and Clara 3, Penelope found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first two, and their second daughter, Rose, arrived in early 1886 with a minimum of fuss, a cheerful baby who smiled early and often. Their family complete, Penelope and Nathan settled into the rhythm of raising children and running the ranch. They had hard times, certainly. There was the drought of 1887 that tested them severely, and the bad winter of 1889 that killed some of their cattle. There were childhood illnesses that terrified them both, and accidents that reminded them how fragile life could be. But through it all, they faced everything together. The partnership Penelope had dreamed of, that Nathan had modeled from his parents, was the foundation of their marriage. They made decisions together, supported each other through difficulties, celebrated successes as a team. Their love, tested by time and challenge, only grew deeper and more resilient. In 1895, 15 years after their wedding, Penelope stood on the porch of their home and watched Nathan teach William, now a young man of 15, the finer points of working with horses. Clara was in the garden, picking vegetables for supper, singing to herself. Rose was inside, practicing her letters with fierce concentration. The ranch had grown to 500 acres, one of the most successful operations in the region. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with a parlor and additional bedrooms, with curtains Penelope had made and furniture Nathan had built. It was a true home, filled with love and life, and the evidence of years well lived. Nathan looked up from the corral and caught her watching. He said something to William and walked over, climbing the porch steps to stand beside her. At 43, he had lines around his eyes and some gray threaded through his dark hair, but to Penelope, he was as handsome as the day he had knelt before her at the buffalo station. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "How lucky I am," Penelope said, leaning into him. "How different my life could have been if you had not been there that day." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "I was the lucky one. I found everything I needed in a woman sitting alone on a station platform, brave enough to trust a stranger." "You made it easy to trust you," Penelope said. "You gave me no reason not to." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children, their land, the life they had built from nothing but faith and hard work and love. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, and the Wyoming sky stretched overhead, vast and impossibly blue. "I love you," Nathan said, as he did every day, the words never losing their power. "I love you too," Penelope replied, as she always did, meaning it more with each passing year. Later that evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Nathan pulled out the chessboard. They played in the lamplight as they had for years, the game familiar and comfortable. When Nathan won, as he usually did, Penelope laughed and demanded a rematch. "Tomorrow," Nathan said, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Right now, I have better things to do than beat you at chess." "Is that so?" Penelope teased, though her arms went around his neck willingly. "That is so, Mrs. Frost." He led her to their bedroom, and the years fell away as they always did in these moments. The passion between them had never diminished, had only deepened with the intimacy of truly knowing each other. They made love with the ease of long practice and the fire of genuine desire, and afterwards lay tangled together in the darkness, talking quietly about plans for the ranch, about the children's futures, about the small details of their shared life. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked suddenly. "Staying here, choosing this life. You could have gone anywhere, done anything." Penelope propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, brushing the hair back from his forehead. "I chose exactly what I wanted, This life, this place, I have never regretted it for a single moment. Not even during that bad winter when we had to eat nothing but beans for 2 months. Not even then, Penelope said firmly. We were together. That was all that mattered. Nathan pulled her down for a kiss, slow and sweet. I will love you until the day I die, he said when they parted. And probably beyond that. Good, Penelope said, because I plan to haunt you in the afterlife if you try to escape me. Nathan laughed, that deep rumble she loved, and pulled her close. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, secure in the life they had built and the love that sustained them. The years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. William grew into a fine young man, strong and capable, with his father's integrity and his mother's business sense. He courted and married the daughter of a neighboring rancher in 1897, bringing her to live at the Frost Ranch and help with the growing operation. Nathan built them a house on the edge of the property, close enough for family but far enough for independence. Clara proved to have a gift for music and a beautiful singing voice. When she was 18, she married a teacher who moved to Buffalo, and they started a music school that brought culture and refinement to the rough town. Penelope attended every recital, bursting with pride at her daughter's accomplishments. Rose, the youngest, was the adventurer of the family. She attended normal school in Cheyenne and became a teacher, eventually taking a position in a growing town in Montana. Her letters home were filled with stories of her students and her independent life. And while Penelope missed her terribly, she was proud that her daughter had the courage to forge her own path. In 1900, William and his wife presented Nathan and Penelope with their first grandchild, a boy they named Nathan after his grandfather. Holding that tiny baby, seeing Nathan's face as he looked at his grandson, Penelope felt the circle of life complete itself. They had built something lasting, something that would continue beyond them. As they moved into their 50s, Nathan and Penelope gradually began turning over more of the ranch operations to William, though neither could quite bring themselves to retire completely. They took more time for themselves, traveling occasionally to visit Clara and Rose, spending long evenings on the porch watching sunsets, reading together, simply enjoying each other's company. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1905, the whole family gathered at the ranch. Clara and her husband came from Buffalo with their 3 children. Rose traveled from Montana with her new fiancé. William was there with his wife and 2 children, with a third on the way. The house was loud with grandchildren and laughter and love, exactly as Penelope had always imagined a family should be. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Nathan and Penelope sat on the porch in the rocking chairs Nathan had built years ago. The November air was cold but not unbearable, and they sat close together under a shared blanket, looking up at the stars. 25 years, Nathan said wonderingly. It has gone by so fast. And so slow, Penelope countered. We have lived every moment of those years, Nathan. Really lived them. Not everyone can say that. No, Nathan agreed. We have been blessed. Penelope thought back to that terrified young woman sitting alone at the Buffalo station, abandoned and lost, with no idea what the future held. She thought about the courage it had taken to accept help from a stranger, to trust when she had every reason not to. She thought about all the moments that had led her here, to this porch, this man, this life. You remember what you asked me that day at the station? She asked Nathan. I asked if you would trust me, Nathan said immediately. The memory was clearly as vivid for him as it was for her. Best decision I ever made, Penelope said, taking his hand and squeezing it. Trusting you. Nathan lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Best decision I ever made was kneeling before you and asking. I almost did not. I stood there for 10 minutes talking myself in and out of it. I was terrified you would say no, or worse, that you would say yes out of desperation and regret it later. I never regretted it, Penelope said. Not for a single second. They rocked in silence, hands clasped, the stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. Somewhere in the house, a grandchild cried briefly and then settled. The sound of family, the sound of home. "I love you, Penelope Frost," Nathan said. "I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you to the end and beyond." "I love you too, Nathan Frost," Penelope replied. "Thank you for seeing me that day, for stopping, for asking me to trust you." "Thank you for saying yes," Nathan said. They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a life beyond anything either had dared dream. The ranch spread around them, solid and real, the product of their shared work and vision. Inside, their family slept safe and warm. Their legacy was assured, their love proven by time. As the night deepened and the cold began to penetrate even their warm cocoon, they went inside together, as they had for 25 years. They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, prepared for sleep with the comfortable efficiency of long habit, and slid into bed together. Nathan's arms came around Penelope, and she nestled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This was what she had been searching for all those years ago, though she had not known how to name it then. Not just love, though they had that in abundance. Not just partnership, though they were equal in all things. Not just family, though they had built a beautiful one. It was all of these things and something more, something indefinable and precious. It was home in the truest sense of the word. It was belonging. It was knowing with absolute certainty that you were exactly where you were meant to be, with exactly who you were meant to be with. It was the peace of a life well lived and a love well tended. As sleep claimed them both, Penelope's last thought was of gratitude. For the cowboy who had knelt before her and offered hope when she had none. For the courage to accept his offer. For every moment, easy and difficult, that had brought them to this perfect now. The stars shone down on the Frost Ranch, on the sleeping family, on the land that would pass to their children and grandchildren. The story that had begun with rejection and desperation had become one of love and legacy. And in the morning, there would be breakfast to make and grandchildren to spoil and all the small joys of another day together. But for now they slept, two hearts beating in rhythm, two lives joined into one, two people who had found forever in the wild, beautiful vastness of Wyoming.